Welcome to Upcancel Ledgebounce, presented by Downbeat Collaborations. This is Jaaahsh, and while I'm usually in Minnesota and joined by Wisely for our typical banter about the world of Smash, a recent occurrence surrounding the Smash WiiU tournament at Genesis piqued my particular interest, and I decided to kind of go rogue and produce a very special episode solo, using my admittedly less than perfect audio equipment that I have here in Rhode Island. I want to cover today what I think is the most interesting Smash 4 news story of the end of last year. This story, as will be obvious to anyone who pays attention to the national Smash 4 scene, is the Genesis Top 32 seed controversy. Before I delve in, though, just a quick word to the wise. By virtue of this episode being a news-centric one, the next half hour has way more of an NPR-style feel, rather than the quippy conversational tone previous episodes of Upcancel Ledgebounce have had. Take this as a sort of modern, here there be dragons warning. If you're not the kind of person who can enjoy a long-form news podcast, this episode won't be your cup of tea, and I'm really, quite honestly, sorry not sorry about that. The content I wanted to cover seemed best served by a more formal, maybe drier approach, and this was the style of delivery I arrived at after arranging my bits of evidence. If you're thinking about turning back now, know that I still respect you, and I wish you a happy new year. In case you fall into that category, I'll give you just a quick second to stop the audio file. Still here? Awesome. Let's start at the beginning. Last August, Genesis 3, the long-awaited next iteration of the storied Genesis Tournament series, was announced, and nearly everyone who saw the news absolutely lost their minds. The first two Genesis were legendary, and they often are seen as hallmarks of togetherness and hype for the Smash community. I know I, like hundreds of others, immediately hopped on Smash GG to register for the tournament, and event organizers tweeted exasperatingly as early registration numbers alone reached well past the number of folks who attended either of the previous two events. With just a quick announcement video and a date, Genesis easily became the first noteworthy major in 2016, and the general buzz within the Smash community continued unabated in the months that followed. Sure, there were small controversies, especially surrounding the compendium and its prize levels. I pride myself, just as a quick aside, as someone who successfully sat through Clash Tournament Shibo's 40-minute video decrying the fundraising attempts on YouTube. Beyond little bumps here and there, though, Genesis seemed poised to ride into the new year with its hype relatively unharmed. But that all changed with an 83-word post that, by some sort of serendipitous Facebook algorithm, nearly everyone who'd interacted with the Genesis Facebook page ended up seeing. The post leaked that the Genesis staff had planned to auto-advance a number of the top seeds out of the first day of pools in both games as singles events. The 48 hours after that post hit was an absolute shit show, and I don't use that term lightly. News of the seeding plan, which some eventually began to call the floating plan since top players were floating, sort of, to day two, sparked sharp, sometimes rudely worded debate between tournament attendees, potential spectators, wider fighting game community folks, and Genesis staff members. It was such a production that my scholarly side kicked into high gear. For those of you that don't know me, outside of Smash, I'm a doctoral student in history, and so this episode of Upcancel Ledgebounce is all about chronicling and documenting the major concerns and discussions that happened during and after the controversy erupted Monday night. I had the opportunity to digitally interview a number of people involved, both directly and indirectly, in the polemic, and I'm excited to share their insights and observations with you in this episode. From my tournament organizer's perspective, I saw lots of interactions, both fruitful and disastrous, between staff members and attendees, and I think the whole situation works really well as a sort of microcosm for how TOs and tournament goers interact in the rapidly growing, or, let's be real, rapidly esportsing Smash community. The short Facebook post that sparked this entire debate was penned, or I guess typed, by California-based smasher Falln, who posted a parallel thread on Reddit soon after his event page Facebook post went live on the evening of Monday, December 28th. Both posts emphasized that Genesis event organizers had not been especially forthright with a certain enormous detail about the first day of competition in January. I caught up with Falln the day after he became the Genesis whistleblower to find out how he'd come across the surprising information that he'd shared.
So the top 64 bracket had been floating around. So I was just talking to Larry Lur about, certain bracket matchups and what we thought was going to happen, stuff like that. And then somewhere in the conversation, he had just mentioned that he had been told that certain player, like the top 32 seeds, didn't have to do pools. And I was like, you're kidding, right? That's the most crazy thing I've ever heard. And he's like, oh, I don't know. That's what I was told. So then I started hunting through the Genesis TOs, and I messaged Bear, and I was like, Bear, I just heard this outlandish rumor that top 32 seeds don't have to do pools. And he's like, oh, no, that's right. I'm like, you're not gonna keep it like that, are you? Right? And he's like, no, 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 that's how we want it, and it's pretty much final. And then he left after that, and I just thought that was just the most absurd thing in the world. So I started making posts on Facebook and Reddit to let everybody know that this was happening because I hadn't seen it before, and no one I had talked to had heard about it. So it came out of nowhere.
Needless to say, both of Falln's threads absolutely blew up. They garnered hundreds of comments each in the first 12 hours they were posted. Initial responses ranged from extreme anger, with some commentators demanding refunds on their registration money, to a mild sense of acceptance. But the overall feeling in both threads mirrored Falln's skepticism about how successfully the decision would play out in practice. One early Reddit commentator, user Pugwest, expressed their anxiety about seeding biases, warning that the staff might use the floating system to prevent some of California's own players from drowning in pools. Discussion surrounding who exactly would be considered the top 32 seeds of Smash 4 was a common theme in both threads, and I agree with many of the folks who were struggling to figure out how the many talented international players would be ranked against North America's best. While speaking with Pulse Gaming's Ori the night after Falln's posts dropped, he acknowledged how fraught of a process it was for the seeding team to take into account the multinational player base.
Being somebody who's been working with the Genesis WiiU staff, it was real hard. We probably spent a good week and a half just trying to decide top 16. And then after that was like, all right, now what do we do for top 32? And everything was given like a week's time of just like work, like of just straight up work. And it's real hard when you have this much international talent to just say like, well, Ranai does real well over Japan. What is he going to do when he comes to America?
Ori certainly wasn't the only one worried about the Japanese players, especially since Genesis had been getting lots and lots of attention for the huge number of attendees who were flying in from Japan. Many of the players, such as QB of Ryu fame, were considerably less well known to lots of us before the fundraising drive to arrange travel for Genesis sparked a number of Reddit links to impressive videos of his play. And I speak for myself, and I'm sure plenty of other Smashers, when I say that one of the major appeals of Genesis 3 is seeing how the dozen or so Japanese players coming in fare against the American competition. Ori's fellow Pulse Gaming member, Vayseth, was especially nervous for how the seeding announcement would affect the players, having spent a considerable amount of time in Japan over the last few years and building rapport with many of their top Smashers. Wanting the event, which for many of them would be their first North American tournament experience, to be an enjoyable one, Vayseth immediately reached out to the players he had access to.
Well, I was immediately relieved when the Japanese players didn't seem to mind at all. They seem to have no preference one way or the other, and they actually just kind of feel like either way it doesn't matter. Abadango's the only player I can text, so I immediately texted him asking his opinion, and we had a short to medium conversation about it. The first thing he said was, I'm going to win anyway, so it doesn't matter if I have to play on day 2 or day 1. So, I mean, I feel a lot of top players feel that way as well. They're almost certainly going to win anyway, so if it saves time or it gives the tournament organizers an ability to do a side event, what's the harm, basically?
Abadango's charming point of view wasn't especially unique amongst top players. Many of the individuals who were likely to be picked in the top 32 selection were, predictably, either silent or cautiously supportive of the Genesis staff's plans. As many users poignantly noted on the Facebook event page, the ruling clearly benefited them. Even if it meant they got to spend more time hanging out and talking with other players, it still meant they got an easy break on the first Friday of the tournament. Another perspective that was brought up in the early hours of the online discussion was that of the spectator. To better understand how the Genesis experience for folks at home would change because of the floating system, I reached out to Z2G, a Smash 4 analyst and contributor to SmashWiiU.net, who will unfortunately only be present at the event through a Twitch stream. Our conversation, which happened mere hours after Falln's post dropped, was frantic and at times very doom and gloom. Z2G frequently expressed exasperation at the pass he'd perceived as being given to the top players of Smash 4. From a more practical and commercial stance, though, he reflected on how early pools of major tournaments will often lean on top players to bolster viewership, and he questioned the broadcasting implications of the decision.
How would stream look like day one, round one pools? If we have none of the top 32 playing, it's going to be whoever is not top 32 down first day. Would I watch that, honestly? If no top 32 players are going to be in it, just to see the brawl of people try to make it into round two? Do you think that's worth watching? I honestly, sure, round two pools are going to be hype, but round one, it's just going to be, it's almost going to be like that freshman level course that just seeds out people. And it's just we don't really want to be here, but we're going to have to kick you out if you're not really want this. That's kind of what it's going to feel like to me. It's just you have to go through it versus, hey, this might be cool to watch, or I might get to see my favorite player beat somebody.
Though I focus so far on the reaction on the ground from event attendees or potential spectators, this doesn't mean that the Genesis staff was entirely absent from the discussion. Right from the beginning of the leak on Monday night, one staff member in particular, Melee Anonymy's Dr. Z, formerly the Director of Tournament Operations, was especially outspoken about defending the decision. Finding himself stuck at an airport on Monday night, Dr. Z reported passing lots of time on his phone attempting to quell what was rapidly emerging as a major outcry from the Smash 4 community. Dr. Z's brusque responses, which were more than likely helped along by his unfortunate travel difficulties, read really poorly to some commentators. In Falln's Reddit post, he screen-capped a particularly dismissive response Dr. Z gave to user Kelsey Green, in which he strongly asserts that the decisions made by Genesis staff regarding floating were absolutely final. I asked Falln how he felt about Dr. Z's tone, and how he felt more specifically about this exchange, the image of which, on Reddit, he titled, "Genesis 3 staff doesn't care."
I'm pretty floored by it, honestly. I understand why they do it. I don't think it's okay. I think it's pretty gross. The way some of the comments were responded. There was one a little bit further in that I didn't screen grab, where I was saying something like the logic behind some of the arguments just weren't making any sense. And then the response was I'm in the clear minority of opinions. Most opinions don't matter, so because of that, I'm in the clear minority. And I was like, well, whose opinions are you gauging then? I don't understand how you could dismiss a thread with 80 people of a lot of different skill levels too. A lot of players that were in the seeded 33 through 64th were saying this is gross, and honestly, not too many players in 1 through 32 really spoke up. I think Ally was trolling, and then I think Trello was really the only other one that spoke up about it. But even so, you have all those people, so I don't know how you would be able to say that would have been a minority opinion in that thread, unless you just didn't know who any of the people were, in which case I wouldn't make that type of a statement to begin with.
Dr. Z's comments, alongside occasional pop-ins by Shit on Smash's DC, were all many of us were getting from Genesis staff. The Twitter account, for instance, of Panda Global's Bear, the head TO for Smash 4, remained remarkably absent of any information or clarification to the hundreds of concerns pouring in. As someone who's never quite had to deal with that amount of controversy at any one event, I couldn't, and really still can't, imagine what must have been going on behind the scenes. When talking with Ori, who I worked with at the Big House 5, we both were not shy about how relieved we were that we were not in the Genesis staff's shoes. It's difficult to truly empathize with the experience of being behind the TO desk when an event goes downhill unless you've been in that situation before, and I absolutely count my lucky stars that I've avoided that bullet thus far. Regardless, when the dust settled a couple days after Falln's post, and I managed to have a joint conversation with Vayseth and Dr. Z, I had a number of pressing questions, though the first one was absolutely obvious. I needed to know how the seemingly out-there idea to float top players had even come about and managed to get approved.
Sure. So this is, for Melee, we had talked about it for a while, because we have so many things going on day one, and it's just become really hard to schedule everybody, especially the top players who are doing this this draft cruise battle thing, which can last up to 8 hours. And so a lot of our top players are also entering multiple events beyond Melee. So we were trying to come up with a way to kind of fix our scheduling. And since the Melee Anonymity Top 100 was coming out soon, this gave us an idea that we could have them all skip round one of pools, and this would free up a lot of time and also give the players who were doing really well over the past year some recognition, and have them skip directly to round two. So as our scheduling process went on, we were coming upon a similar problem for scheduling all the Wii U events, including the Wii U crew battles and also the possible Brawl Tournament of Legends, which might happen depending on the compendium level reached. And so we were like, okay, we did this for Melee. I wonder if we can do this for Wii U. So I've got a team of 3 people that help me make all the Wii U decisions, which are DC from NorCal, Bear, and Crow. And so I asked them, do you think this would be a good idea? And we were thinking about it for a little bit. We weren't really sure whether this would work or not. So we went to this Facebook group called Global Smash 4 Discussion or something like that, which has about 100 people in it. And it's primarily top community leaders, TOs, and players in that group. And so we went over there basically purely on a fact-finding mission, and we're like, okay, this is what we did for Melee. We're thinking about doing this for Wii U. Is this a good idea or not? And so we posted that something like 3 weeks ago, and the response was unanimously positive. Not like overwhelmingly positive, like everybody thought this was the best idea ever, but everybody that responded at least was like, oh yeah, I think we can make this work. So that happened, started about 3 weeks ago, and over the next couple weeks, people were discussing it and trying to figure out kind of what the top 32 might be. We're doing 32 because Melee was 64 and Wii U's got about half the entry, so we thought 32 might be a good number. So a discussion went for about 2 weeks with the seating, and the one thing that I regret about doing this is that we didn't announce this decision earlier, and the reason we didn't do that is we wanted to wait until the seating was finished, because we wanted to avoid a lot of people speculating, and especially people petitioning everybody on the Genesis 3 team, everybody in the Wii U community about who deserves what seed. That's what we were trying to avoid, and in retrospect, it was clearly a mistake not to put this announcement out earlier.
What I find particularly interesting about his response, as I think many others did, was his mention of a major Smash 4 backroom-like group on Facebook. When Dr. Z dropped a face spin on the Genesis event page 19 hours after Falln's post, it was the first long-term official statement any Genesis staff member had made on the floating controversy. In the paste bin, Dr. Z gestured toward the existence of an unnamed Facebook group he approached, a group we now know to be named the Global Smash 4 Discussion Group, which he mentioned explicitly in our conversation. According to research and a little bit of speculation conducted by user ChromeRob on Reddit, the Global Smash 4 Discussion Group is a secret, closed Facebook group comprised of just shy of 100 members, all reportedly top players, community leaders, and event organizers, most of whom are not publicly known for being part of any group of this sort. Though Esam in a Melee It On Me stream on Wednesday dropped some members' names, many of the prominent tournament organizers I asked, including Vayseth, remarked that it seemed strange that such a group would exist without them. As the entity that Dr. Z had bounced the idea for the floating system off of, he felt rather distraught that the group had failed to live up to its authoritative promise, and the experience left him feeling like Smash 4's community lacked something significant.
To me, it says something about the state of leadership in the Wii U community, and it's really disappointing because it's a community that really deserves to have strong leadership, people who will interact with the rest of the community and do their best to advance the metagame and also just the state of the game in general and its stature in all of esports. And so to me it's more disappointing on that end, really, more than anything else. So I just don't feel like they're being served well.
The paste bin that I mentioned earlier that Dr. Z dropped was clearly intended to address and calm some of the bigger concerns that many in the community, myself included, were expressing. But it failed to achieve that purpose. In it, Dr. Z includes an apology for having been less than transparent about the unique seating structure for Genesis, but the apology fell on mostly deaf ears, as parts of the numbers-minded commentariat began dissecting the brief details he had given about the yet unannounced bracket structure for the event. Mentioning how the Smash 4 Top 32 would be joining a Top 96 in Wave 2, speculations began abounding about how Wave 2 would even work with such an odd number progressing. We would later learn, somewhat disappointingly, that the initial plans for Wave 2 bracket structures were designed with the 96 players in winners alone. I myself even fell prey to these wayward assumptions that Wave 2 was going to feature an unreasonably small number of players, something that kindled my own growing dislike of the Genesis' staff experimentation with new kinds of brackets. Other social media users fixated on a different part of Dr. Z's pastebin. They focused in on its final line, which said that the staff was, quote, not ruling out the possibility of changing this, meaning the floating system, for Wii U, end quote. Taking this as a sign that the staff's initial apparent resistance to changing their mind on the policy softened, debate seemed to redouble on Twitter and Facebook, even as other prominent figures shouted over the masses that Dr. Z's long-form post had convinced them that the Genesis Smash 4 seeding discussions had been made satisfactorily logically, and that they no longer harbored any misgivings about it. Falln, though, predictably still fell on the side of the dissatisfied. He remained skeptical of the staff's earlier claims that nothing was going to change, and he connected the TO response to an earlier polemic in Smash 4's history.
In terms of saying something is absolutely final, honestly, I kind of skipped over that because if you remember a month or two ago, it was the exact same rodeo with the wireless controllers. Yeah. And they said maybe 5 posts in a row, this is not changing, this is not changing. And then all of a sudden, oh yeah, this is changing. Turns out it's not that hard at all. So I didn't put much stock into that, but I did kind of use that to get people to speak up a bit more about what was going on.
I want to take a moment here to talk a little bit about Falln's statement. I think in what he said, he does an excellent job of pointing out something very honest about the core goals of TOing. The desire to experiment, and on the flip side, the desire to stick with what has worked in the past are both very, very perilous paths, I feel, to walk as a TO. But, especially in the case of the former, they're paths that we all must take sometimes. Though I initially planned to speak with Vayseth and Dr. Z almost exclusively about the Genesis seeding controversy, our conversation sort of organically branched off into larger questions relating to the general act of tournament administration. I found it to be a really productive and interesting back and forth in its own right, and so it'll be uploaded in its raw entirety as a sort of bonus piece of content for this episode of Upcancel Ledgebounce. Vayseth especially really delves deep into the nuances and dangers of extreme buy systems, and later on, all three of us contribute ideas towards how larger events can manage to entice top players to attend without gutting the experience of the mid-level player and the spectator. Immediately after this episode is released, that conversation in its entirety will be posted to the Downbeat Collaboration YouTube and SoundCloud pages, so go check those out if you're inclined to. In any case, Falln's assumptions about the flexibility of the Genesis staff turned out to be correct, as many of us had hoped, when 46 hours after his first posts were launched and countless social media users expressed their sometimes over-the-top disagreement, the Genesis staff posted their own Facebook and Reddit hybrid message on Wednesday afternoon announcing the reversal of its so-called floating decision, meaning it was plopping the top 32 of Smash 4 right back into the first day of pools. A Genesis staff member whose real name is Jonathan Silva and whose gamertag I embarrassingly failed to find, called the decision unanimous, but snarkily expressed his discontent with the community's kickback, arguing that the pressure to change the decision ignored the many benefits that removing the top 32 seeds would have for mid-level players. I found I disagreed with Silva, implying that the tone of the debate had been unproductive, as I believed, and to an extent still believe, that the outcry by the Genesis audience was a major catalyst in affecting the change that same group was calling for. Dr. Z, however, mirrored Silva's respectfulness rhetoric, making it clear in our conversation how important he feels the tone of the initial post damaged the conversation between organizer and attendee.
One thing that I would really hope people keep in mind, and this is something that I try to practice, is that when I have people I disagree with, I never want to make it an adversarial kind of relationship with my, with my antagonist, so to speak. And the reason for that is it makes it harder for my, my opponent, even though I don't like to think of them in that terms. It makes it harder for them to change their minds if I come at them in an adversarial way. And I think that perhaps if I really believe that the tone of the post that Falln made really set the tone of the discussion overall for the last 2 days. I think a lot of people wanted to bandwagon on the tone that he made in his first post and his responses to me. And I think that we could have had this discussion, we could have had this decision made earlier with a lot less, heartache and hand-wringing from everybody involved if this post was made in a more neutral. You don't have to be friendly about it, but you should take a neutral tone about it and come at it as, here's a problem, what are we going to do about it to solve it, instead of the manner that a lot of people took. There are a lot of posts on Facebook about, this is the worst decision ever, oh my god, give me my money back. And that's insane. It just really does not help anybody to take that kind of action. And I realize that you're not ever going to convince everybody to kind of take that course of action, to take that tone. But I just really hope people do in the future, because it's something that I try to practice in my personal life. I'm far from perfect at it, but it's something that I aspire to do. And I really hope that that everybody in the future tries to do the same thing, because it greases everything, it makes everybody happy, it makes things happen quickly and more painlessly for everybody.
In that same spirit, Vayseth was eager to emphasize the need for a healthy dynamic between event goer and organizer. Toward the end of our conversation, he returned to this point.
I think, Josh, before we wrap up, the last thing I want to say is out to the listeners. If anybody can take anything away from this interview, I want to stress that we've shown that your tournament organizers are willing to work with you, and we really want to hear your feedback, and we want to know going forward what we can do to better serve you guys out there.
One thing that was clear to me from doing the legwork for this episode, and what inspired me to gather these folks and their perspectives as I've done, is that though our tournaments are getting larger, and as Wisely and I talk about last episode, the allure to borrow or innovate tournament elements to make sure we are continuing supporting ourselves financially is strong. The relationship that Vayseth and Dr. Z gestured toward between the many different strata of our community, that is, the average player, the stream watcher, the top player, the tournament organizer, and heck, the director of tournament operations, that relationship must remain healthy, even as the operations become more corporatized or more esports. Falln's gut reaction to news he got from Larry Lurr spurred him to call upon the wider Smash 4 community to express our feelings about it. I myself joined in by tweeting somewhat sarcastically about how I ought to auto-advance Minnesota's top player into winners finals at every tournament. Though Dr. Z's initial responses to the controversy seemed final, it was clear from speaking with him that he and the rest of the Genesis staff felt that floating top players would make for a better event overall for many different kinds of players and spectators. It's a credit then, I think, to both groups, the dissenting audience and the organizers, that the messy situation we as Genesis goers found ourselves in was resolved in such a timely manner. The Smash 4 community may be young, and we may, in fact, be desperately in need of leadership, but I think the 48 hours following Falln's posts demonstrate unequivocally well that our largest tournaments, even if they are ran by Melee TOs, are in good, responsible hands, and can still be held accountable for their decisions, and, indeed, their errors. And that's that, I think. Special thanks to all the folks I had the honor of speaking to in the past few days, Falln, Dr. Z, Vayseth, Ori, and Z2G, all of whom provided really interesting insight and perspective on a complex, crazy episode in the world of Smash. I've included each of their Twitter handles in the description of this episode. I'd urge everyone, as I said before, to go take a listen to the full unedited conversation between Vayseth, Dr. Z, and I, available now on Downbeat Collaboration's YouTube and SoundCloud pages. It provides really interesting views, I think, into the minds of 3 very different TOs regarding enormous tournaments and how they serve different kinds of players. Once again, I'm Jaaahsh with Downbeat Collaborations. You can find me on Twitter at db_Jaaahsh, that is db_JAAAHSH. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep that whistle polished. You'll never know when you'll need to recall your Pikmin. Happy New Year.